He paid to erase her past. Years later, she interrupted his wedding with 3 little guests. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel and let's get started. New York City glowed with promise as the autumn sun spilled through the windows of NYU's design studio. Danielle Haynes tucked a strand of curly hair behind her ear as Professor Jenkins leaned over her work, nodding appreciatively at her augmented reality concept. Exceptional perspective, Danielle. The spatial integration is unlike anything I've seen from a third-year student. Thank you, Professor, she replied, her smile genuine despite the exhaustion that had shadowed her for days. As Jenkins moved to the next student, Danielle's hand unconsciously drifted to her pocket, fingers brushing against the folded pregnancy test she'd taken that morning. 2 pink lines. Unmistakable. Life-changing. 3 years with Marcus Bell, heir to the Bell Hotel's dynasty. 3 years of bridging worlds, her modest Bronx upbringing and his Manhattan privilege. 3 years of believing love transcended social boundaries. Now, at 25, with her design career just beginning to take shape through internships at boutique agencies, this pregnancy felt like both miracle and mountain. The memory of their first meeting washed over her as she packed up her materials. The Tribeca Gallery where she'd worked evenings to supplement her scholarship. Marcus had wandered in during a contemporary exhibition, his tailored suit and confident stride marking him as someone who belonged among the 7-figure price tags. Yet he'd spent the entire evening discussing color theory with her, not the curator. "Art is the great equalizer," he'd said, eyes twinkling as he handed her his business card. "Dinner tomorrow?" 3 years later, after countless dinners, weekends in the Hamptons and whispered promises, Danielle was certain of their foundation. A baby would cement it. That evening, Danielle transformed her tiny Brooklyn apartment into a scene of romance. Fairy lights twinkled along the exposed brick wall. The second-hand table was set with the only matching plates she owned, a bottle of sparkling cider chilling in an ice bucket she'd borrowed from her neighbor. She gently touched her still flat stomach. "Soon," she whispered, adjusting the single rose in its vase. The door buzzer rang at exactly 7 o'clock. Marcus was nothing if not punctual. He entered with his usual grace, his Armani suit impeccable, dark hair perfectly styled. As he kissed her cheek, Danielle caught the familiar scent of his expensive cologne. "Something smells delicious," he said, though his eyes remained on his phone, thumbs typing rapidly. "Just finalizing the Tokyo acquisition," he explained, finally pocketing the device. "Father's expecting the paperwork tonight." Throughout dinner, Danielle tried to find the perfect moment. Marcus spoke animatedly about his imminent promotion to executive vice president, his father's plans for expansion in Asia, the board meeting where he'd impressed key investors. "To us," Danielle finally said, raising her glass of cider, "and our future." Marcus clinked his glass against hers, his green eyes, those mesmerizing emerald eyes that had first captivated her, finally focusing fully on her face. "Marcus, I have news," she began, her heart hammering. "Something wonderful has happened." She reached for his hand across the table. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed seemed to stretch into infinity. Marcus's expression transformed from confusion to shock to something Danielle had never seen directed at her before: horror. "Pregnant?" he repeated, withdrawing his hand. "You're pregnant?" "Yes," she said, her smile faltering. "We're going to have a baby." Marcus stood abruptly, pacing the small space between table and kitchenette. "A pregnancy? Now? Do you have any idea what this means for my future?" He ran his hands through his immaculate hair. "My father is grooming me to take over the company. I can't show up with a pregnant girl from the Bronx." Each word landed like a physical blow. Danielle stared at him, unable to reconcile this cold stranger with the man who had whispered love against her skin countless nights. "I thought you'd be happy," she managed, her voice small. "I thought we were building something." Building something? Marcus laughed, a harsh sound. Danielle, be realistic. We've had fun, but surely you didn't think… He stopped, straightening his cuffs. I need to think. I'll call you. He left without touching his dessert, the door closing with a quiet click that somehow hurt more than a slam would have. For 7 days, Danielle existed in limbo. 7 days of unanswered calls, of crying herself to sleep, of alternating between hope and despair. When Marcus's text finally came, it was brief and businesslike. Meeting tomorrow, 2 p.m., my place. The doorman at Marcus's luxury high-rise regarded her with barely concealed disdain as she crossed the marble lobby. In the elevator to the penthouse, Danielle smoothed her department store dress, suddenly conscious of every thread, every scuff on her only pair of heels. Marcus wasn't alone. 2 men in identical charcoal suits sat at his dining table, leather portfolios open before them. Beneath the crystal chandelier that cost more than everything she'd ever owned, Danielle felt herself shrinking. "Sit down, Danielle," Marcus said, his tone detached. No kiss, no touch, not even her name softened by affection. "These are my attorneys," he continued as she lowered herself into a chair. "We need to discuss arrangements." "Arrangements?" she echoed. Marcus leaned forward, hands clasped on the marble tabletop. "Let's be practical, Danielle. You never would have fit into my world. A girl with no connections, no background, no profile that the Bell family requires. Be realistic." He slid a thick envelope across the table. $250,000 for you to disappear from my life, and a confidentiality agreement. Consider my generosity. Many women like you don't receive even that. The words cut deeper than the December air conditioning. "How can you do this? I gave you 3 years of my life. I'm carrying your child. My family owns judges in 3 states. His tone was glacial as he adjusted his platinum Rolex. "You'll never prove paternity. Take the money, Danielle. It's the best someone like you will get in life." With trembling hands and tears blurring her vision, Danielle signed the 50-page contract, each signature a small death of her dreams. One of the attorneys provided a cashier's check, the other collected the signed documents. Business concluded. "The elevator is that way," Marcus said, already checking his phone. "I trust we won't see each other again." 3 weeks later, Danielle lay on a table in a community clinic in Brooklyn, cold gel on her abdomen as the ultrasound technician moved the wand with practiced precision. "Well, honey," the technician said, eyebrows rising, "looks like we've got a situation here." "Is something wrong?" Danielle asked, fear clutching at her throat. "Not wrong, just more." The woman turned the screen. 1, 2, 3 babies. You're carrying triplets." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Triplets. 3 babies. 3 heartbeats flickering on the grainy screen. Alone in the clinic's bathroom, Danielle sobbed until she had nothing left. The semester she'd have to abandon. The $250,000 that had seemed like a fortune now insufficient for the needs of 3 children. The broken future she'd have to somehow reconstruct. The following months became a hell of survival. New York's astronomical costs forced Danielle back to Detroit, her hometown. She rented a small apartment in a deteriorating neighborhood, the kind where sirens were lullabies and locked doors were prayers. 3 jobs became her reality: receptionist at a medical clinic during the day, pharmacy cashier at night, and freelance designer during the rare moments of rest. Her swelling body made each shift an exercise in endurance. "You need to rest more," the public health doctor warned at her 6th-month checkup. "Your blood pressure is concerning." But rest was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not with 3 babies on the way. Not with rent due and medical bills mounting. At 7 months, Danielle collapsed while scanning prescriptions at the pharmacy. She awoke in a hospital bed, monitors beeping, tracking 3 separate heartbeats. "Pre-eclampsia," the doctor explained. "You'll need to stay here until we can stabilize your condition." Alone in the sterile room, Danielle checked her email on her phone, finding a message from Bell Hotel's legal department. This communication serves as a reminder that all provisions of the confidentiality agreement remain in full effect. Any breach will result in immediate legal action and forfeiture of all funds received. Danielle placed her hands on her enormous belly, feeling the movements of the 3 lives within. Each kick, each flutter a reminder of both betrayal and blessing. "You will never need anything he could offer," she whispered fiercely. "I'll build an empire bigger than his. One day, he'll look at us and realize what he threw away." 2 months later, the triplets were born premature but healthy: Malcolm, Alexander, and James. When the nurse placed them in her arms for the first time, Danielle gasped. Each tiny face framed by identical emerald green eyes, Marcus's eyes. In the quiet of her hospital room, exhausted beyond measure, Danielle made a vow to her sons. "We're going to show the world what we're made of," she promised, "and it has nothing to do with the Bell name." On a sleepless night weeks later, nursing her babies while remotely working on digital designs, Danielle had an epiphany. The world was changing, and the augmented reality technology she'd studied in university was just beginning to bloom. With the last dollars of the silence money, she invested in an online advanced programming course. Her first project, an augmented reality application for school-age children. Working in the pre-dawn hours while the babies slept, she developed a prototype that allowed mathematical concepts to be visualized in 3D. "You are my strength, my little warriors," she whispered to the sleeping infants as she finalized the code. "One day, the world will know our names, and not his." While the doctors monitored the 3 tiny hearts beating within her, Danielle couldn't have predicted that these same hearts would one day rule the technology world, nor that her own heart would find the strength to build a legacy that would make Marcus Bell pale with regret. The grainy black and white image on the small monitor flickered, drawing Danielle's attention from the technician's face to the screen. The woman's brow furrowed in concentration as she moved the ultrasound wand across Danielle's still flat abdomen. "That's interesting," the technician murmured, adjusting a dial and leaning closer to the screen. Danielle's heart skipped a beat. "Is something wrong with the baby?" "Not wrong, exactly." The technician repositioned the wand, pressing slightly harder. "I'm seeing... Wait." Her eyes widened. "Oh my." The cold gel on Danielle's stomach seemed to freeze her entire body. "Please, just tell me." The technician turned the monitor toward Danielle and pointed to 3 distinct circles on the screen. 1, 2, 3 babies. "You're having triplets, my dear." The words hit Danielle like a physical blow. "Triplets?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the steady whooshing sounds coming from the monitor. "3 babies?" "3 heartbeats, strong and clear," the technician confirmed, her initial surprise softening into sympathy as she observed Danielle's stunned expression. "I'll give you a moment while I get the doctor." Alone in the small examination room of the Brooklyn Community Clinic, Danielle stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. 3 children. Not 1 life to provide for, but 3. The $250,000 that had seemed like a small fortune, the price Marcus Bell had placed on her disappearance, suddenly felt woefully inadequate. In the clinic's bathroom afterward, Danielle locked herself in a stall and broke down. Sobs racked her body as she pressed her fist against her mouth to muffle the sound. 3 babies, 3 mouths to feed, 3 college educations to save for, 3 of everything, and she was completely alone. Back in her tiny Brooklyn apartment that evening, Danielle created a spreadsheet on her laptop. The numbers were merciless. Even with careful budgeting, New York City's astronomical living costs would drain Marcus's generosity within 2 years. Her interrupted semester at New York University meant postponing her degree indefinitely. The internships she'd carefully cultivated were already slipping away after just 2 weeks of unexplained absence. "I can't stay here," she whispered, hands resting on her stomach. "I'm sorry, little ones." 3 days later, Danielle was selling her most valuable possessions on eBay: her professional-grade design laptop, her DSLR camera, the leather portfolio that had held all her career hopes. Each item photographed, listed, and shipped from her kitchen table, converting tools of her future into cash for survival. Her prized vintage design books went to a second-hand store, along with most of her wardrobe. She kept only what would fit in 2 suitcases: practical clothes, a few mementos, and her most basic drawing supplies. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Danielle boarded a Greyhound bus bound for Detroit, her hometown. The 18-hour journey was a physical manifestation of her descent, from promising NYU student with a wealthy boyfriend to a pregnant single woman returning home in defeat. "Ticket says you're going all the way to Detroit," observed the elderly woman who took the seat beside her. "Visiting family?" "Going home," Danielle replied, massaging her lower back. At 12 weeks pregnant with triplets, her body was already changing faster than a typical pregnancy. "Oh, that's nice. Family waiting for you there?" Danielle turned toward the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. No one's waiting. The apartment Danielle found in Detroit was in a neighborhood she'd once been warned to avoid: crumbling infrastructure, barred windows, and vacant lots where once proud homes had stood. But at $400 a month, it was what she could afford. The landlord, a heavy-set man with tobacco-stained fingers, didn't ask questions when she paid 3 months in advance. "Heat works most days," he said, handing her the keys. "If the pipes freeze, call the super. He'll get to it when he can." That first night, Danielle sat on the bare mattress she'd purchased from a discount store, eating a sandwich while surrounded by unpacked boxes. The walls were thin enough to hear the neighbor's television, the ceiling stained with watermarks that resembled continents on a faded map. A single window overlooked a cracked parking lot. "This is temporary," she told her unborn children, patting her stomach. "I promise you won't grow up here." Securing employment became Danielle's immediate mission. With her pregnancy still inconspicuous, she applied for every position she could find. By the end of her first week in Detroit, she had cobbled together 3 jobs: morning receptionist at a community health clinic, evening cashier at a 24-hour pharmacy, and freelance graphic designer whenever she could find the energy. Her alarm clock rang at 5 each morning. By 6, she was dressed and waiting at the bus stop, regardless of weather. The health clinic shift lasted from 7:30 until 3, with a 30-minute lunch break she often spent working on freelance projects. After a quick change of clothes in the clinic's bathroom, she caught the bus to the pharmacy for the 4 to midnight shift. Home by 12:30, she would force herself to work for at least 2 more hours on design projects: simple logos, business cards, flyers, anything to supplement her meager income. "You're new here," remarked a pharmacy customer one evening, watching Danielle scan medication. "Shouldn't be on your feet so much in your condition." Danielle had reached 16 weeks, and her pregnancy was becoming impossible to hide. "No choice," she replied with a tired smile. The woman, a nurse judging by her scrubs, frowned. "There's always a choice. The father helping out?" "There is no father," Danielle said, the phrase becoming her standard response. In her mind, Marcus had forfeited that title the moment he slid that envelope across his marble table. By her 20th week, Danielle's body was rebelling against her punishing schedule. Her ankles swelled to twice their normal size. Her back ached constantly. The triplets, developing rapidly, pressed against her organs, making breathing laborious and sleep elusive. During a routine prenatal checkup at the public health clinic where she received discounted care, the doctor's expression grew serious as he checked her blood pressure. "Ms. Haynes, your pressure is dangerously elevated, and there's protein in your urine. These are warning signs of preeclampsia." "What does that mean?" Danielle asked, though she already knew. She'd been researching obsessively since learning she carried triplets. "It means you need bed rest, immediately. Multiple pregnancies are high risk already, and your body is showing signs of stress." Danielle laughed hollowly. "Bed rest? Doctor, I work 3 jobs. There's no one else to pay my rent." The doctor removed his glasses, his expression grave. "Then you need to find someone, because the alternative is risking both your life and your baby's. Preeclampsia can lead to seizures, organ failure, even death." That night, in the bathroom of her apartment, Danielle vomited from exhaustion and fear. The face in the mirror was a stranger's, hollow-cheeked, dark circles beneath her eyes, skin sallow. At 25, she looked 40. 2 days later, while restocking shelves at the pharmacy, Danielle's vision blurred suddenly. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed to pulsate. She reached for the counter to steady herself, knocking over a display of vitamins. "Danielle?" Her manager's voice sounded distant, underwater. "Danielle, are you okay?" The floor rushed up to meet her. She awoke in a hospital bed, the rhythmic beeping of monitors filling the room. 3 separate heart rate displays tracked her baby's vital signs. "You collapsed at work," explained an emergency room doctor. "Your blood pressure spiked to dangerous levels. We've stabilized you for now, but you'll need to remain hospitalized until we can ensure both your safety and your baby's." Alone in the sterile room, surrounded by machines monitoring 4 lives, Danielle reached for her phone. Among the missed calls from her employers was an email notification that made her blood run cold, a message from Bell Hotel's legal department. This communication serves as a reminder that all provisions of the confidentiality agreement remain in full effect. Any breach will result in immediate legal action and forfeiture of all funds received. Even now, with her body failing and her future uncertain, Marcus was ensuring her silence. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Someone must have seen her collapse, perhaps recognized her name. As the monitors tracked the 3 strong heartbeats within her, Danielle made a decision that would alter the course of all their lives. "You never predicted this, did you, Marcus?" she whispered, caressing her swollen belly. "You thought you were paying for one inconvenient child to disappear, but there are 3 of them, and I swear on everything I am that these children will build a legacy that will make yours seem insignificant." While the doctors monitored the 3 tiny hearts beating within her, Danielle couldn't have predicted that these same hearts would one day rule the technology world, nor that her own heart would find the strength to build a legacy that would make Marcus Bell pale with regret. The hospital room was eerily quiet, except for the steady beeping of monitors tracking 4 separate heartbeats, Danielle's and those of her 3 unborn children. Outside the window, Detroit's winter had painted the world in shades of gray, a fitting backdrop to the solitude of her circumstances. After 2 weeks of hospitalization for preeclampsia, the doctors had finally deemed her stable enough for discharge, though with strict orders for bed rest that seemed impossible to follow. "Just a few more papers to sign, Ms. Haynes," said the discharge nurse, sliding a clipboard across the bedside table. "And remember, minimal activity. Your body is working overtime carrying these 3. Danielle nodded absently, her mind already calculating how to survive the coming months. The medical bills, even with her employee discount from the clinic, were overwhelming. Her savings, what remained of Marcus's payment, was dwindling faster than she'd anticipated. The day she returned to her small apartment, a snowstorm had blanketed Detroit. The building's heating system had failed again, leaving the air inside barely warmer than outside. Wrapping herself in every blanket she owned, Danielle stared at the ceiling, feeling the movements of 3 lives inside her. "I promise you won't grow up like this," she whispered, her breath visible in the cold room. 4 weeks later, just as March was beginning to hint at spring, Danielle's water broke during a telemedicine appointment with her obstetrician. At barely 32 weeks, it was too early. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and paramedics monitoring vitals. In the delivery room, the organized chaos of medical professionals prepared for the high-risk birth of triplets. "No family we should call?" asked a kind-eyed nurse as they prepped Danielle. "There's no one," she replied, gripping the sides of the bed as another contraction seized her body. 6 hours of labor culminated in 3 tiny cries, spaced minutes apart. Malcolm arrived first, red-faced and indignant at his abrupt entry into the world. Alexander followed 2 minutes later, quieter but with a fierce grip on the doctor's finger. James, the smallest, emerged last, requiring brief assistance with breathing before joining his brother's chorus. When the nurse brought the 3 swaddled bundles to Danielle's bedside, she felt a wave of love so powerful it seemed to physically lift her from the mattress despite her exhaustion. "Would you like to hold them together?" the nurse asked. Danielle nodded, arms outstretched to receive her sons. As each was placed against her chest, she studied their tiny features, the identical slope of their noses, the delicate curve of their ears, the wisps of dark hair. Then, one by one, their eyes flickered open, revealing identical irises of such a distinctive emerald green that Danielle's breath caught painfully in her throat. Marcus's eyes, unmistakably his, staring back at her from 3 different faces. "You are my little warriors," she whispered fiercely, tears streaming down her face. "You are perfect, and we're going to show the world what we're made of." In that moment, holding her 3 sons against her heart, Danielle renewed the promise she'd made months before. These children would never need anything Marcus Bell could offer. She would build something greater than his inherited empire, something earned through grit rather than birthright. The reality of caring for 3 premature infants alone proved even more brutal than Danielle had imagined. The boys spent their first 3 weeks in the NICU, gaining strength while Danielle shuttled between the hospital and her apartment, trying to create a suitable space for their homecoming while managing mounting medical debt. She sold her bed to make room for 3 second-hand cribs purchased from a local charity. She learned to function on 2-hour increments of sleep, the maximum any of the boys would allow before demanding attention. Her body, still recovering from the difficult pregnancy and birth, protested every movement. The routine became a grueling cycle of feeding, changing, soothing, pumping breast milk, and collapsing briefly before starting again. There was no differentiation between day and night, weekday and weekend. Time became measured only in the growing strength of her sons and the dwindling numbers in her bank account. By the triplets' 2nd month, Danielle had begun taking on remote design work again, the only employment compatible with caring for 3 infants. She set up a makeshift desk beside the cribs, working one-handed on her laptop while holding a baby with the other, often with another in a carrier on her chest and the third nestled in a bouncer she could rock with her foot. It was during one such night at 3 in the morning that the epiphany struck. Malcolm was nursing at her breast while she adjusted a logo design for a client. James slept briefly in the bouncer, and Alexander fussed in the carrier against her chest. Her eyes burned from exhaustion, the screen blurring before her. As Malcolm's tiny hand reached up to touch her chin, Danielle glanced down and noticed how his eyes tracked the movement of her cursor across the screen. Despite his newborn state, there was an awareness there, a focus that seemed beyond his weeks. "You like that, don't you?" she murmured, moving the cursor in deliberate patterns. His eyes followed, rapt. Something clicked in Danielle's mind, a connection to her university research on augmented reality interfaces. She had been studying how children interact with spatial computing, how their developing brains process 3-dimensional digital information differently than adults. What if she could create something that would make learning more intuitive for children? Something that visualized abstract concepts in ways traditional methods couldn't? The next day, after settling the triplets for a rare simultaneous nap, Danielle dug through her remaining possessions until she found her old research notes from New York University. The concepts still held. Children learned better when they could manipulate information in 3-dimensional space rather than on flat surfaces. Looking at her bank statement, Danielle made a calculated gamble. With the last significant portion of Marcus's money, she purchased an online advanced programming course, investing in her future rather than merely surviving the present. For the next 4 months, Danielle lived on a brutal schedule. Days were devoted entirely to the triplets, while nights became a battleground against exhaustion as she absorbed complex programming languages. She learned to code with one hand while rocking a fussy baby with the other, memorizing syntax during feedings, testing algorithms in the pre-dawn hours when the boys finally slept. The sacrifice manifested physically. Her clothes hung loose on her frame, dark circles became permanent fixtures beneath her eyes, and her hands developed a perpetual tremor from caffeine and exhaustion. But as the triplets grew stronger, so did her resolve. By the time the boys reached 8 months, Danielle had developed a working prototype of her educational augmented reality application. Using the camera and processing power of a smartphone, Math Vision could project simple three-dimensional shapes into the real world, allowing children to physically interact with mathematical concepts. When she tested it by projecting colorful geometric shapes above Malcolm's crib, his delighted giggles confirmed her theory. Even Alexander and James, typically more reserved, reached out to touch the floating images with wide-eyed wonder. "This is just the beginning," Danielle told them as they batted at a glowing sphere. "This is how we build our future." The financial reality remained harsh. By the triplets' first birthday, a modest celebration with a single cupcake divided 3 ways and a photo taken on her aging phone, Danielle was facing eviction. The landlord had been patient beyond expectation, but his own financial pressures had caught up. "You've got 2 weeks," he said apologetically, unable to meet her eyes. "I'm sorry, Danielle." That same day, she received notification of a small technology startup fair being held in Detroit, focused on educational innovation. The registration fee of $100 represented nearly half her remaining cash, but Danielle recognized it as possibly her last opportunity. She spent a week refining her prototype, testing it on the triplets, and preparing a 5-minute pitch that condensed a year of desperation and inspiration into a compelling business proposition. She hired a neighborhood teenager to watch the boys for the 3 hours she would be gone, her first time away from them since their birth. At the fair, Danielle stood out in her thrift store blazer amid a sea of tech industry casual. Her display was minimal, just her phone running the Math Vision prototype and a simple poster showing potential educational applications. But when she demonstrated how the application could transform a tabletop into an interactive multiplication table with 3-dimensional visual representations, people stopped to watch. As the event wound down, a silver-haired man in rimless glasses approached her booth. He had observed her demonstration 3 separate times without comment. "Your application," he said finally. "It's using spatial mapping algorithms similar to what's employed in industrial modeling, but you've simplified the processing requirements significantly." Danielle nodded, surprised by his technical assessment. "I had to. It needed to run on standard consumer devices to be accessible." "I'm Richard Chen," he said, extending his hand. "Horizon Ventures. You have something really special here. Would you be interested in discussing seed funding?" That night, as Danielle signed her first investment contract for $50,000 while Malcolm slept in her lap and his brothers played at her feet, she felt the first true moment of hope since reading those 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test 15 months before. While signing her first investment contract of $50,000, holding one child in her lap and with the others playing at her feet, Danielle didn't know she was taking the first step in a journey that would lead her, 15 years later, to a confrontation that would forever change the Bell Empire and redefine the meaning of justice. The morning light filtered through newly installed blinds in a modest office space in downtown Detroit. 4 years had passed since that pivotal moment in the startup fair, and the fresh paint on the wall proudly displayed the angular minimalist logo of Onyx Digital. Danielle Haynes stood before it, hand extended to the nervous young woman sitting across from her. "Welcome to Onyx Digital, Melissa. We're small, but growing fast. I think your design background will be perfect for where we're headed." The woman shook Danielle's hand enthusiastically. "Thank you so much for this opportunity, Ms. Haynes. I've been following Math Vision's development since it launched in the school district pilot program." Danielle smiled. glancing toward the corner of the office where three identical 5-year-old boys were building an elaborate structure with magnetic blocks. Malcolm, the analytical one, was explaining something to his brothers with the seriousness of a university professor, despite his tiny voice and the chocolate smudge on his cheek. "My sons are my first testers for everything we develop," Danielle explained, nodding toward the triplets. "They have very strong opinions about user interfaces." As Melissa began filling out employment paperwork, Danielle's phone rang. The caller ID displayed Oakwood Elementary Principal. "Ms. Haynes, this is Principal Watkins. I was wondering if you might be available to come in tomorrow morning. It's about your son's test results." Danielle felt her heart skip. "Is everything okay?" "Oh, absolutely. More than okay, actually. We've administered the standard cognitive assessments and, well, we should discuss the results in person." The following morning, Danielle sat stiffly in a chair designed for someone half her size, facing Principal Watkins and the school psychologist, Dr. Chen. "Ms. Haynes," the psychologist began, opening 3 identical folders. "Your sons completed our standard testing last week. The results are exceptional." She slid the papers across the desk. "Malcolm scored in the 99th percentile across all cognitive domains. Alexander's visual spatial abilities are literally off our charts, and James shows advanced reasoning patterns typically seen in children twice his age." Principal Watkins leaned forward. "Ms. Haynes, we're talking about IQ scores in the range of profound giftedness. All 3 of them." "What does this mean for their education?" Danielle asked, her voice steady despite the emotion swelling in her chest. "We're recommending specialized programming. Our resources are limited, but there are methods we can implement to keep them challenged. Frankly, they're already performing academically at a 3rd-grade level, possibly higher in some areas." That evening, Danielle sat at their kitchen table, helping the boys with exercises far beyond standard kindergarten curriculum. Malcolm solved multiplication problems with eager concentration, while Alexander recreated from memory a complex diagram of the solar system he'd seen only once in a library book. James, always the most introspective of the 3, was hunched over a detailed drawing of the human heart, complete with labeled chambers and major vessels. "James, where did you learn all the parts of the heart?" Danielle asked, amazed at the precision. Without looking up, he continued coloring the aorta red. "The heart is a muscular pump, Mommy. It moves blood through the body using electrical impulses that trigger contractions." Danielle blinked, wondering how many 5-year-olds discussed cardiac function as casually as cartoon characters. 2 weeks later, Danielle stood before a classroom of 3rd graders at Detroit Public Elementary, demonstrating math vision to their wide-eyed amazement. The children gasped as fractions appeared in 3-dimensional form above their desks, allowing them to physically separate and recombine the pieces. "You can actually see why 1/3 plus 1/3 equals 2/3, a freckled girl exclaimed, reaching out to manipulate the glowing segments. The teacher approached Danielle as the children experimented with the app. "This is revolutionary. They're grasping concepts that usually take weeks to teach." By the time Danielle returned to the office, a message was waiting. Representatives from Edison Educational Publishing wanted to meet. The meeting was scheduled for the following week, and Danielle prepared meticulously, rehearsing figures and projections until she could recite them in her sleep. The Edison executives arrived in expensive suits and polished smiles, looking somewhat out of place in Onyx's modest office. "Ms. Haynes will be direct," said the lead executive after her demonstration. "We'd like to acquire MathVision outright, $200,000, plus a small royalty on future educational implementations." Danielle's heart raced. $200,000 would solve every financial problem she faced: the boys' education funds, a better apartment, perhaps even a small house in a safer neighborhood. "It's a generous offer," she said carefully, "but I'm not developing a product to sell. I'm building a platform for the future of education." The executive's smile tightened. You're a single mother with 3 children and a startup operating out of what looks like a converted storage space. Be practical. This offer solves your problems." For a flashing moment, Danielle was back in Marcus's penthouse, hearing him say, "Take the money, Danielle. It's the best someone like you will get in life." She stood, extending her hand. "Thank you for your time, gentlemen. But this technology is worth much more than what you're offering, both financially and in its potential impact. I'll be developing it further with Onyx Digital." That night, after tucking the boys into bed, Danielle sat at her kitchen table staring at her bank statement. The balance was precarious, enough to make payroll for her small team for another 2 months if they landed no new contracts. Had she just made a catastrophic mistake by rejecting financial security? She was still awake at 2 in the morning when an email arrived from a venture capital firm she'd contacted months earlier. "Intrigued by your educational AR platform. Available to pitch next week?" 3 weeks later, Danielle sat across from Sophia Winters, a sharp-eyed investor known for backing female-led tech companies. "What differentiates Onyx from other educational technology startups?" Sophia asked after Danielle's presentation. "I understand how children actually learn," Danielle replied without hesitation. "Not how we think they should learn, but how their developing brains actually process information. Our technology meets them where they are, spatially and cognitively." By spring, Onyx Digital had secured enough investment to hire 3 additional developers and move to a larger office. The team celebrated with pizza and soda, the triplets darting between adults with the restless energy of 5-year-olds. "To Onyx Digital and Math Vision 2.0, Danielle toasted, raising her paper cup, "and to the best team I could ask for." As the boys grew alongside the company, Onyx Digital began gaining recognition beyond Detroit. Math Vision was being implemented in schools across Michigan, with pilot programs starting in Ohio and Illinois. Educational researchers were publishing papers on the improved learning outcomes for students using spatial visualization techniques. When the Detroit Technology Innovation Awards announced Danielle as recipient of their Educational Impact Award, it felt like validation of every sleepless night and sacrificed comfort. At the ceremony, Danielle took the stage in a dress she'd saved for weeks to purchase, her 3 sons sitting proudly in the front row, their matching green eyes shining with admiration. "Innovation isn't always about creating something that's never existed," she said, accepting the crystal trophy. "Sometimes it's about reimagining how we approach problems that have always been with us. Education is the greatest equalizer we have, but only if it reaches children in ways they can truly absorb and retain." The next morning, a local business journal published a photograph of Danielle with the triplets captioned, "Educational Tech Innovator Danielle Haynes celebrates award with her sons." The image clearly showed the boys' distinctive emerald green eyes, a genetic signature impossible to mistake. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived at the Onyx office, bearing the Bell Hotel's logo on the return address. Inside was a letter from the legal department. "It has come to our attention that you have begun to achieve a certain public profile that may risk violation of the confidentiality agreement executed between yourself and Marcus Bell. We remind you that any public exposure of the minor children that could reasonably lead to identification of their paternity constitutes breach of contract." Danielle read the letter twice, then deliberately tore it into small pieces, dropping them into the trash bin beside her desk. "He doesn't get to control our future with fear," she said to the empty office, her voice steady and certain. While tearing up the threatening letter and throwing the pieces in the trash, Danielle couldn't possibly imagine that, a decade later, it wouldn't be Marcus's lawyers who would fear public exposure, but Marcus herself, when the empire she built with her sons would completely overshadow the Bell legacy. 3 years after tearing up Marcus Bell's threatening letter, Danielle stood in the heart of Onyx Digital's new headquarters, watching 50 employees navigate the open-concept workspace. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off sleek workstations where developers and designers collaborated on the next generation of educational technology. The company's growth had been meteoric, expanding from a small startup to a recognized innovator in augmented reality education. "The Chicago School District is ready to sign," announced Claire, Onyx's newly hired sales director, approaching with a tablet. "That's 5 major metropolitan school systems implementing Math Vision by next semester." Danielle nodded, glancing at the quarterly projections. "Schedule a video conference with all the superintendents for Thursday. I want to walk them through the new science module extensions personally." From her glass-walled office, Danielle could see everything. The creative team brainstorming at the digital whiteboard, engineers testing new interface protocols, marketing staff preparing materials for an upcoming education conference. The journey from that tiny rented office to this 3-story building in downtown Detroit represented countless sleepless nights and bold decisions. Twice a week, Danielle left the office early to pick up the triplets from their school for gifted children. At 8 years old, the boys had already skipped 2 grades, their exceptional intellects requiring specialized education that constantly challenged them. Today, she arrived at the Innovation Academy to find Malcolm in the robotics lab, methodically programming a small rover to navigate an obstacle course. His fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced precision, his emerald eyes narrowed in concentration. "The proximity sensors needed recalibration," he explained without looking up. "Now it can detect objects as small as 1 centimeter." In the library, Alexander sat surrounded by advanced physics texts, absorbing information at a rate that astounded even his specialized teachers. He could recite entire pages verbatim after a single reading, his photographic memory paired with analytical skills that let him connect concepts across disciplines. "Did you know," he said by way of greeting, "that the same mathematical principles govern both fluid dynamics and certain economic models? I've been cross-referencing theorems." James, the most intuitively empathetic of the 3, was in the biology lab, carefully examining cell structures under a microscope. Already he showed remarkable aptitude for understanding biological systems, approaching them with a sensitivity that suggested future medical brilliance. On their drive home, Danielle listened as the boys discussed quantum computing principles with the casual ease other children might talk about video games. Their vocabulary, analytical frameworks, and abstract reasoning abilities placed them intellectually among high school seniors, despite their small statures and occasional childish giggles. "Tomorrow is Community Service Day," Danielle reminded them as they pulled into the driveway of their modest but comfortable home in a safe neighborhood. "We're helping at the downtown shelter." Malcolm looked up from his tablet. "But I was going to finish my algorithm optimization project tomorrow." "The algorithm can wait," Danielle said firmly. "Success without service has no meaning. We build technology to help people, not just because we can." Every month, Danielle ensured the boys volunteered somewhere: food banks, literacy programs, environmental cleanups. Despite their growing financial comfort, she was determined they understand privilege and responsibility walked hand in hand. The next morning, as they served meals at the community kitchen, Danielle watched her sons interact with people experiencing homelessness. Malcolm explaining how to navigate government websites for assistance, Alexander helping a veteran fill out housing applications, James sitting patiently with an elderly woman who simply needed someone to listen. "Your boys are something special," remarked the kitchen manager. "Most kids their age can barely make eye contact with our guests." "They understand that circumstances don't determine worth," Danielle replied, thinking of how differently their lives might have unfolded had Marcus made different choices. That evening, as they returned home, Danielle's phone rang with an urgent call from her chief technology officer. "Someone's exploiting a vulnerability in our software," he explained, voice tight with tension. "TechCore is claiming our security protocols are compromised. They're telling schools to shut down Math Vision immediately." TechCore was a massive technology conglomerate that had tried to acquire Onyx multiple times. Each refusal from Danielle had been met with increasingly aggressive competitive tactics. By morning, the damage was spreading. 3 school districts had suspended use of Math Vision. The company's stock value had dropped 12%. Technology blogs were publishing articles questioning Onyx's security practices. Danielle called an emergency meeting, gathering her core team around the conference table while developers frantically analyzed code on multiple screens. "They've identified a backdoor access point in our spatial mapping module," explained Wei, the head developer, pointing to lines of code. "It's sophisticated, would have taken dedicated resources to find." "How bad is the actual vulnerability?" Danielle asked, maintaining outward calm despite her racing heart. "That's the thing," Wei replied. "It's limited to non-essential user preference data. They're making it sound like student information is at risk, but that's simply not true." For the next 48 hours, the office became a war room. Programmers worked in shifts, whiteboards filled with code and contingency plans, empty coffee cups accumulating as the team fought to contain the crisis. Danielle moved between strategy sessions and emergency calls with school administrators, trying to prevent total collapse of their client base. At home, the strain was showing in other ways. Malcolm, always the most inquisitive of the triplets, had begun asking more pointed questions about their father. "Mom," he said one evening as she wearily reviewed crisis management protocols at the kitchen table, "why do all our documents only have your last name? Everyone else in my class has 2 parents on their birth certificates." Danielle looked up, momentarily disoriented by the shift from corporate crisis to personal one. "That's a conversation for another time, sweetie. Mom's trying to save the company right now." "But it's statistically unusual," Malcolm persisted. "The absence of paternal documentation—" "Malcolm, please," Danielle interrupted, rubbing her temples. "Not now." The crisis reached its peak when the technology news site TechWire published an article titled, "Math Vision Security Flaws, Are Children's Data at Risk?" featuring quotes from TechCore executives expressing grave concerns. 3 more school districts suspended their contracts. Investors began calling, demanding explanations. The board called for an emergency meeting to discuss damage control. After 2 sleepless nights, Danielle found herself staring at the ceiling at 3 in the morning, mind racing between catastrophic scenarios. Suddenly, she sat bolt upright in bed, grabbing her phone. "Wei, it's me," she said when her CTO answered groggily. "The vulnerability isn't a flaw, it's an opportunity." By dawn, Danielle had outlined her counterattack. Rather than merely patching the security issue, Onyx would transform it into a revolutionary feature. The same mechanism that created the vulnerability could be repurposed to create an adaptive learning system that responded to individual student needs while strengthening security tenfold. 3 days later, Danielle stood before a room of nervous investors and board members, dark circles under her eyes but voice steady with conviction. "We've not only addressed the security concerns," she explained, demonstrating the new functionality. "We've transformed the challenge into a breakthrough. Math Vision now adapts to each student's learning patterns, creating personalized educational pathways while establishing a self-reinforcing security protocol." One by one, the investors' expressions shifted from skepticism to intrigue. When Danielle finished her presentation, the board unanimously approved an emergency development sprint to implement the new features. Within weeks, the narrative had completely reversed. Educational technology publications praised Onyx's innovative response. Schools began reinstating their contracts. Then came the unexpected email from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. DARPA was interested in exploring applications of Onyx's adaptive security protocols for governmental systems. The DARPA representatives who visited Onyx headquarters were serious, detail-oriented, and clearly impressed by the technological infrastructure Danielle had built. As the company weathered the storm and emerged stronger, Malcolm returned to his questions about their father with renewed determination. "All my friends know their dads," he said one evening as Danielle tucked him into bed. "Why don't we know ours?" Finally, Danielle sat down with all 3 boys, knowing this conversation could no longer be postponed. "Your father," she began carefully, "comes from a wealthy, powerful family. When I told him I was pregnant, he chose his money and status over being part of our lives. That was his choice, not a reflection on you three." "Does he know about us now?" Alexander asked, his analytical mind immediately assessing the implications. "He knows I had a child," Danielle answered truthfully. "He doesn't know there are three of you." "Why can't we find out who he is?" Malcolm pressed. "Because some truths come with their own timing," Danielle replied, "and right now we have more important things to focus on." 2 weeks later, Danielle signed Onyx Digital's first government contract, a $10 million deal to develop secure educational platforms for military families. As she watched her 3 sons witness the historic moment for the company, she felt a complex mix of pride and vindication. When the $10 million contract was signed, transforming Onyx into a technological powerhouse, Danielle couldn't foresee that this would be merely the beginning of a meteoric rise that would put her company in headlines alongside Bell Hotels, setting the stage for a confrontation that had been written in the stars since the night Marcus discarded her. 4 years after signing that first government contract, the name Onyx Digital had become synonymous with revolutionary augmented reality technology. The New York Stock Exchange trading floor buzzed with anticipation as Danielle Haynes, dressed in a custom Armani suit, rang the opening bell, officially marking Onyx's initial public offering. The digital display behind her showed the company's starting stock price, $42 per share, valuing the company at just over $1 billion. From the gallery above, 3 12-year-old boys with identical emerald eyes watched their mother with unmistakable pride. The triplets had grown into remarkable young men, each developing distinct personalities while sharing the same striking intelligence and determination. "She did it," Alexander whispered to his brothers as photographers captured the historic moment. 51% ownership retained, full creative control maintained. The transformation of their lives was evident not just in Danielle's ability to take a company public while maintaining majority control, but in the material changes surrounding them. Gone was the struggling single mother who had once worked 3 jobs to keep them fed. In her place stood a formidable CEO whose technological vision had reshaped educational systems across the globe. Their modest home had been replaced by a striking modernist mansion overlooking Lake Michigan, its clean lines and expansive windows reflecting Danielle's aesthetic sensibilities. The driveway housed a collection of electric vehicles, practical luxury rather than ostentatious display. Most significant was the private helipad where a Bell 525 helicopter, an ironic choice of manufacturer that hadn't escaped Danielle's notice, stood ready for her frequent business travel. 3 weeks after the successful IPO, Malcolm stood at a podium in San Francisco, addressing the International Conference on Computational Efficiency. Despite being the youngest presenter in the event's history, he spoke with natural authority about the revolutionary data compression algorithm he'd developed. By restructuring how systems allocate memory during recursive operations, he explained to the audience of industry veterans, "We've achieved a 40% reduction in energy consumption without sacrificing processing speed." In the front row, executives from major technology corporations exchanged impressed glances. One leaned toward his colleague, whispering, "The kid's 12, for God's sake. Imagine what he'll be doing at 20. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., Alexander walked the halls of NASA's headquarters alongside senior scientists, explaining how his topographical mapping system could identify minute surface variations on distant planets that traditional imaging missed. "The algorithm doesn't just capture visual data," he explained, pointing to a 3-dimensional rendering of Martian terrain. "It extrapolates structural composition based on shadow patterns and light absorption rates." The lead scientist shook his head in amazement. "We've been trying to develop something like this for years. How did you conceptualize this approach?" Alexander shrugged slightly. "I just saw the patterns. They were always there." In Baltimore, James sat quietly in a research laboratory at Johns Hopkins, reviewing the feedback on his paper about neuroplasticity and adolescent brain development, a paper that had just been accepted by the Harvard Medical Journal after rigorous peer review. "Your insights into how trauma affects neural pathway development are remarkable," said Dr. Sharma, the neurologist mentoring him, "especially your hypothesis about accelerated cognitive adaptation as a response to emotional stress." James nodded, his eyes momentarily distant. Sometimes the brain builds strength from what could have broken it. Back in Detroit, Danielle's office wall displayed the physical manifestations of her success. The Forbes cover featuring her serious expression above the headline, "The Visionary Who Redefined Augmented Reality." The Wall Street Journal profile naming her among the 10 most influential CEOs of the decade, the Presidential Innovation Award presented at the White House. Each achievement had been methodically documented in a leather-bound journal she kept locked in her desk drawer. Each entry represented not just a professional milestone, but a personal victory over the words Marcus had once used to dismiss her. "Take the money, Danielle. It's the best someone like you will get in life." Those words had become the silent fuel that powered her relentless drive. Every time she closed a major deal, launched a revolutionary product, or received international recognition, she mentally addressed them to Marcus Bell's ghost. One evening, as snow fell gently outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of their home library, Danielle gathered her sons for a conversation she had postponed too long. At 12, they had begun asking more pointed questions about their paternity, questions that required more substantial answers than she had previously provided. "I think you're old enough now to know more about your father," she began, watching their identical expressions shift from surprise to intense focus. The boys sat straighter in their chairs, exchanging quick glances that communicated volumes between them. "His name isn't important right now," Danielle continued carefully. "What matters is understanding the circumstances. He comes from a powerful, wealthy family that didn't accept me. When I told him about my pregnancy, he chose his family's expectations and his financial future over us." "Did he ever try to find us?" Malcolm asked, his analytical mind immediately seeking to establish patterns of behavior. "No," Danielle answered honestly. "He made his choice very clear. He offered money for me to disappear from his life permanently." "What kind of legal framework surrounded this arrangement?" Alexander inquired, already thinking in terms of contracts and obligations. "A confidentiality agreement that prevented me from publicly identifying him as your father," she explained. "It's why we've always been careful about public exposure." James, always the most emotionally intuitive, asked the question that cut deepest. "He never wanted us at all?" Danielle moved to kneel before him, taking his hands in hers. "He never gave himself the chance to know what extraordinary people you would become. That was his loss, not a reflection of your worth." Later that night, Danielle found Malcolm in the home office, systematically searching through databases of wealthy New York families. "It's not time for that yet, Malcolm," she said gently, closing his laptop. "When will it be time?" he asked, his emerald eyes, so disturbingly like Marcus's, filled with determination. "When knowing serves a purpose beyond curiosity," she answered. "Sometimes information without context does more harm than good." The following month brought a new challenge when GlobeTech, a multinational technology conglomerate, launched an unexpected hostile takeover attempt of Onyx Digital. Their offer of $17 billion represented a premium of 40% over the current market capitalization, a figure designed to tempt shareholders and overwhelm resistance. Danielle called an emergency board meeting, facing down executives and major investors across the polished conference table. "GlobeTech isn't interested in our educational mission," she stated firmly. "They want our neural interface patents and government contracts. Our technology would be stripped for parts and our vision discarded." The GlobeTech representatives smiled with practiced condescension. "Ms. Haynes, you've built an impressive company, but surely you recognize that this offer represents extraordinary value for shareholders. It's time to be practical." There it was again, that word, practical. the same dismissive tone Marcus had used. "I didn't build this company to sell to the highest bidder," Danielle replied, her voice steady. "I built it to change the world. Our 5-year roadmap includes neural interfaces that will revolutionize medical training, disaster response systems that will save thousands of lives, and educational platforms that will reach children previously excluded from quality learning experiences." The debate raged for hours, with Globe Tech representatives gradually increasing their offer to $20 billion. Throughout the contentious discussion, Danielle maintained her position with unwavering confidence. Unknown to the participants, 3 12-year-old boys watched the proceedings via the security feed, huddled around a tablet in Malcolm's bedroom. "She's not backing down," Alexander whispered admiringly as their mother systematically dismantled another Globe Tech argument. "Of course not," James replied. "She didn't build all this just to hand it over." When the final vote came, Danielle's passionate defense of Onyx's independent future carried the day. The board rejected Globe Tech's offer, committing instead to Danielle's ambitious expansion vision. That evening, Danielle celebrated with her original team members, raising glasses in the private dining room of Detroit's finest restaurant. "To independence," she toasted, "and to building technology that serves humanity, not just profit margins." Later that night, while reviewing industry news before bed, an article caught Danielle's attention. "Marcus Bell ascends to Bell Hotel's presidency as father steps down." The accompanying photograph showed Marcus at a press conference, silver threads now visible in his dark hair, but his emerald eyes, the eyes her sons had inherited, unchanged. While filing away the magazine with the news about Marcus's ascension to the Bell Hotel's presidency, Danielle couldn't know that in just 3 years, their trajectories would collide with the force of 15 years of secrets and success, in an event that would focus the world's eyes on the truth she had protected for so long. Danielle slipped the magazine with Marcus's photo into her desk drawer, a curious sense of déjà vu washing over her. 15 years had transformed them both, her into a technological visionary, him into the president of his family's hotel empire. Paths that had diverged so painfully now ran parallel in the upper echelons of American business. She closed the drawer with a definitive click, as if physically shutting away the past. 3 years later, that past remained securely contained as Danielle reviewed the acceptance letters spread across her home office desk. Exeter Academy, the nation's most prestigious boarding school, had not only accepted the triplets but offered them advanced placement. At 14, they would enter as sophomores rather than freshmen, a rare accommodation even for the elite institution accustomed to exceptional students. "They're ready," Danielle whispered to herself, running her fingers over the embossed school crest. The thought of separation created a physical ache in her chest, but she recognized the necessary step in their development. Exeter would provide challenges even their brilliant minds needed. That evening, she called the boys into the library, its walls lined with books they'd devoured years earlier than expected. "Exeter said yes," she announced, watching their reactions. Identical faces with expressions as different as their personalities, Malcolm's calculating assessment, Alexander's immediate strategic planning, James's emotional processing. "When would we start?" Malcolm asked, already mentally reorganizing his research schedule. "Fall semester," Danielle replied, "which means we have the entire summer together first." The summer became precious, a carefully orchestrated balance between Danielle's expanding global business responsibilities and concentrated family time. Mornings often found her in the home office's holographic conference room, her 3-dimensional projection addressing Onyx executives in Tokyo, London, São Paulo, and Sydney simultaneously. The neural interface pilot exceeded expectations in all test markets, she explained to her international team, manipulating virtual data displays with practiced precision. "We'll accelerate full deployment to all 7 territories by 4th quarter. Afternoons and evenings belonged to the boys. They hiked the Grand Canyon's North Rim, Malcolm cataloging geological formations, Alexander mapping their route with modifications for optimal viewpoints, James identifying desert flora with encyclopedic precision. Standing at the canyon's edge, Danielle photographed her sons silhouetted against the blazing sunset. The moment crystallized everything she'd fought for. 3 extraordinary young men, confident and curious, unburdened by the rejection that had preceded their birth. While Danielle focused on creating memories, Malcolm had secretly embarked on a different project. Late at night, he used his administrative access to Onyx's supercomputers for personal research, building an algorithm that cross-referenced historical geolocation data with public records and facial recognition parameters. The search parameters need refinement, he muttered to himself, adjusting variables as comparative analyses ran across multiple screens in his bedroom. Too many false positives. In the mansion's extensive library, Alexander spent hours studying contractual law, particularly confidentiality agreements and their enforcement limitations. His tablet contained dozens of legal precedents involving paternity, inheritance rights, and disclosure restrictions. Every contract contains vulnerabilities, he noted in his meticulous digital journal. It's simply a matter of identifying the correct pressure point. James, while equally curious about their unknown father, approached the question with characteristic emotional intelligence. One evening, he found his brothers huddled over Malcolm's latest search results. "Have you considered what this might do to Mom?" he asked quietly. "She's protected us from whatever happened. Maybe there's a reason." Malcolm looked up, his expression determined. "Don't you want to know who he is? Why he abandoned us? We have the right to answers." "Rights and wisdom aren't always aligned," James replied. "Whatever we discover might hurt her." As July faded into August, the brothers' investigation accelerated. Malcolm's algorithm had narrowed potential candidates significantly, cross-referencing men who had been in proximity to their mother during the relevant time frame, had sufficient financial resources for the settlement she'd received, and shared specific genetic markers that could produce their distinctive eye color. One evening, Malcolm called his brothers into his room, closing the door with uncharacteristic secrecy. "I've reached 98% confidence," he announced, displaying a detailed analysis on his monitor. "Based on temporal coincidence, financial capability, physical characteristics, and social position." The screen displayed a corporate biography of Marcus Bell, current president of Bell Hotels. "His eyes," Alexander whispered, leaning closer to the screen. "Identical to ours," Malcolm confirmed. "The genetic probability of this specific emerald shade appearing randomly is statistically negligible." James studied the photograph, unconsciously touching his own face. "He looks like us, or rather, we look like him." The discovery created a seismic shift in the brothers' understanding of themselves. Their hypothetical father had transformed into a specific person, one whose name, face, and life story they could study in meticulous detail. Alexander quickly uncovered additional connections. Bell Hotels is headquartered in New York. Mom was attending New York University when she got pregnant. The timelines align perfectly. Their research accelerated with newfound focus. Malcolm hacked into archived security footage from Bell corporate events during the relevant period, finding several instances where their mother, younger, less polished, but unmistakably Danielle, appeared alongside Marcus at charity galas and art openings. "She never told us she actually knew him well," Malcolm noted, watching a clip where Marcus guided a smiling Danielle through a crowded event, his hand possessively at the small of her back. 1 week before they were scheduled to depart for Exeter, Danielle received an embossed invitation that would inadvertently accelerate everything. The National Technology Summit had selected her to receive their prestigious Innovation of the Year award for Onyx's breakthrough neural interface system. "We would be honored by your presence at the ceremony in New York City next month," the invitation read. "Your contributions to technological advancement represent the pinnacle of American innovation." When Danielle mentioned the award over dinner, the triplets exchanged meaningful glances. "We'd like to come with you," Malcolm said. to see you receive the recognition you deserve." Danielle looked surprised but pleased. "It's in the middle of your first month at Exeter. Are you sure you want to miss classes?" "Some educational experiences can't be found in classrooms," Alexander replied smoothly. "Watching your accomplishments being recognized seems more valuable." What Danielle didn't know was that Malcolm had already discovered a crucial detail. Bell Hotels was a primary sponsor of the National Technology Summit. The hotel chain's logo appeared prominently on the event's website, with Marcus Bell listed as a presenting sponsor. Later that night, Malcolm showed his brothers his latest discovery, a Vanity Fair article announcing Marcus Bell's engagement to Anastasia Worthington, daughter of a Republican senator from Connecticut. "The wedding of the year, Bell Hotels heir to wed New England society jewel," the headline proclaimed above a photograph of Marcus and his blonde fiancée at a charity gala. "The timing is almost poetic," Alexander noted. "His wedding is scheduled just 3 weeks after the summit." "Do we tell Mom?" James asked, always considering the emotional implications. They debated the question extensively before Malcolm made the decision. The next morning, as Danielle stood in her expansive closet selecting a custom Balenciaga suit for an upcoming board meeting, the triplets entered her bedroom with Malcolm carrying his tablet. "Mom, we found him," Malcolm announced without preamble. Danielle turned, earrings half-fastened, her expression shifting from confusion to comprehension in an instant. "Found who?" Malcolm displayed the tablet screen showing the engagement announcement. "Marcus Bell, our father." Danielle froze, the diamond earring slipping from her fingers to the plush carpet. For a moment she seemed unable to breathe, staring at the face she hadn't seen in person for 15 years. "How long have you known?" she finally asked, her voice remarkably steady. "We've been investigating for months," Alexander explained. "The National Technology Summit. He'll be there as a sponsor, and we'll be there supporting you." Danielle studied her son's faces, so like the man on the screen, yet filled with a compassion and integrity he had never possessed. For a brief moment, she glimpsed the frightened boy Marcus must have been, unable to stand up to his father to defend what was right. "This is an important professional moment for me," she said calmly. "We shouldn't let the past interfere with that." The boys exchanged glances, recognizing their mother's diplomatic deflection for what it was. Not a denial, but a postponement. 2 weeks later, as they boarded the private jet to New York, the triplets maintained a united front of innocent support for their mother's achievement. What Danielle didn't realize was that her brilliant sons had already orchestrated a public revelation that would transform the National Technology Summit into the stage for a 15-year overdue reckoning. While boarding the private jet to New York, Danielle tried convincing herself she could control the inevitable encounter, unaware that her brilliant sons had already orchestrated a public revelation that would transform the National Technology Summit into the stage for a 15-year overdue reckoning. The sleek Gulfstream G650 touched down at Teterboro Airport outside New York City, its wheels making smooth contact with the runway. Inside, Danielle checked her reflection in the compact mirror, adjusting a stray lock of hair. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the devastated student who had fled this city 15 years ago. This Danielle Haynes had the polished confidence that came from building a multi-billion-dollar empire through sheer determination. Across from her, the triplets sat in identical tailored navy suits, their emerald eyes, Marcus's eyes, bright with anticipation. She still couldn't shake the feeling they were planning something beyond simply supporting her award acceptance. "Remember," she said, closing her compact, "this weekend is about Onyx's achievement, nothing else." "Of course, Mom," Malcolm replied with a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. As their convoy of black SUVs wound through Manhattan toward the Four Seasons, Danielle gazed at the skyline she had once called home. Somewhere in this concrete jungle, Marcus Bell was preparing for both the summit and his upcoming wedding, blissfully unaware of the collision course their lives were on. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel had been transformed into a technological wonderland for the National Technology Summit. Holographic displays showcased innovations from across the industry, while executives, investors, and genius developers networked over champagne and canapes. The combined net worth in the room could fund a small nation. Danielle entered with her 3 sons flanking her, creating an immediate stir. Her fitted emerald dress, deliberately chosen to match her son's eyes, complemented her warm brown skin and accentuated the toned physique maintained by her personal trainer. Diamond earrings caught the light with each turn of her head. "That's Danielle Haynes," whispered a venture capitalist to his colleague. "The AR queen rarely brings her sons to public events. They must be 15 now? 16? 14, corrected his companion. Supposed to be absolute prodigies. The one on the left developed an algorithm that Microsoft licensed for $20 million. Cameras from the Wall Street Journal and CNBC swiveled to capture the entrance of technology's most enigmatic female CEO with her rarely seen children. The triplets moved with practiced ease, their matching faces composed in pleasant expressions that revealed nothing of their internal calculations. Across the ballroom, Marcus Bell stood with a group of hotel investors, discussing expansion opportunities in emerging markets. At 45, he remained handsome, though slight creases at his eyes and threads of silver at his temples added maturity to his once boyish good looks. His bespoke suit spoke of old money and careful tailoring. The Bell Portfolio edition in Singapore has exceeded projections by 17%, he was saying when the name Danielle Haynes rippled through nearby conversations. Speaking of innovative thinkers, interjected an investor, Danielle Haynes is tonight's headliner. They say she turned down 3 acquisition offers above $1 billion in the last 2 years alone. Remarkable, another added. Her neural interface technology is revolutionizing everything from education to medicine. Marcus maintained his pleasant expression, the name not immediately connecting to his past. Yes, Onyx Digital has been quite the success story. I believe our technology division has used some of their protocols. He casually stretched his neck to locate the woman generating such buzz. When he finally spotted her surrounded by admirers, the Dom Perignon nearly slipped from his fingers. Recognition hit him physically, not of the polished CEO, but of the young woman from the Bronx whose dreams he had so casually crushed. Then his gaze fixed on the 3 young men beside her. The shock drove the blood from his face. Those eyes, his eyes, staring back at him from 3 identical faces, the same jawline that greeted him each morning in the mirror, multiplied by 3. "Excuse me," he muttered to the confused investors, setting down his champagne with an unsteady hand. Danielle was deep in conversation with the CEO of Microsoft when she felt a presence behind her. Before turning, she recognized the cologne, different brand but same notes he had always preferred. A shiver ran up her spine as 15 years collapsed into a heartbeat. "Danielle?" His voice was the same, perhaps a touch deeper with age. She turned slowly, maintaining a professional smile that revealed nothing of the thundering pulse beneath her composed exterior. Marcus Bell. What a surprise. Her voice was controlled, devoid of the emotion that had once saturated every word she spoke to him. "I believe you haven't met my sons, Malcolm, Alexander, and James." The 3 teenagers regarded Marcus with clinical curiosity, like scientists examining a particularly interesting specimen. The silence stretched, becoming almost tangible in the space between them. "Your sons." Marcus swallowed visibly, gaze darting from one identical face to the next, the mathematical impossibility of coincidence crushing his practiced composure. 3? Triplets. A surprise I discovered after our commercial agreement. Danielle maintained her professional tone, as if discussing a corporate merger rather than his abandonment. The Microsoft CEO, sensing the crackling tension, tactfully excused himself. Other guests, however, began to notice the strange tableau, Marcus Bell staring at 3 teenagers who bore an uncanny resemblance to him. "Could we speak privately?" Marcus whispered, perspiration beginning to form at his temples despite the ballroom's aggressive air conditioning. "I'm afraid that won't be possible. We're about to receive an award." Danielle smiled with serene confidence. "Interesting, isn't it? Onyx is now valued at 10 times Bell Hotel's market cap. Who could have imagined that those $250,000 would become the best investment of my life?" The color drained completely from Marcus's face as he realized she had just revealed the amount of his silence payment within earshot of several guests. "You can't do this," he hissed through clenched teeth. "We have an agreement." "A confidentiality agreement with non-competition and non-defamation clauses," Danielle replied evenly, "which I've honored rigorously for 15 years. I'm merely commenting on an investment I made and introducing my sons to an acquaintance from the past." The Master of Ceremonies announced the beginning of the awards presentation. Marcus was scheduled to present one of the categories as a major sponsor. "We need to talk after this," he insisted as he backed away. "Absolutely fascinating," Malcolm commented, watching Marcus retreat toward the stage. His body language indicates extreme stress responses. "Elevated heart rate, pupil dilation, hyperhidrosis," added James, the future doctor. "Classic signs of acute anxiety." "And we haven't even started," Alexander smiled slightly. On stage, Marcus struggled to maintain his composure while presenting the Innovation in Software Award. His normally smooth delivery was punctuated by slight stammers and awkward pauses. From the front row, his fiancée Anastasia Worthington observed his unusual behavior with growing concern, her aristocratic features pinched in confusion. When the time came for the main award, Innovation of the Year, it was the CEO of Google who took the stage to announce the winner. And the award goes to Danielle Haynes of Onyx Digital Innovations for her groundbreaking neural augmented reality platform. The audience erupted in applause as Danielle ascended to the stage, her 3 sons following a step behind. At the microphone, she thanked her team and then paused, surveying the audience with quiet confidence. "But my greatest gratitude goes to my sons, Malcolm, Alexander, and James. They are my inspiration, my strength, and my greatest achievement." She looked directly at Marcus in the audience. 15 years ago, someone told me I wasn't valuable enough, that I didn't belong in certain circles, that I would never achieve success without the right connections. That moment of rejection became the fuel for everything I've built. A murmur rippled through the audience. Marcus sank deeper into his chair, Anastasia's questioning gaze burning into his profile. Today, Onyx employs more than 12,000 people globally. Our technology saves lives in hospitals, educates children in 70 countries, and our market value exceeded $2.3 billion just last week. She paused deliberately. "We built this without inheriting an empire, without the weight of a family name, without shortcuts, proving that value doesn't come from where you were born, but from what you build." The photographers captured the perfect moment. Danielle radiant on stage with 3 teenagers who were carbon copies of Marcus Bell, who looked like he might faint in the audience. While the photographers captured the moment, Danielle radiant on stage with 3 teenagers who were carbon copies of Marcus Bell, who looked like he might faint in the audience, no one suspected that the real confrontation was yet to come, meticulously orchestrated by 3 14-year-old geniuses determined to get answers their mother had protected their entire lives. The cacophony of applause gradually subsided as Danielle descended from the stage, her 3 sons following in perfect synchronicity. The crystalline award caught the light, momentarily blinding Marcus as she passed his table. For the remainder of the ceremony, he sat rigid with tension, barely registering the subsequent presentations. Anastasia repeatedly squeezed his arm, whispering questions he deflected with terse non-answers. As the formal proceedings concluded and guests dispersed into the elegant cocktail reception, Danielle found herself surrounded by admirers and potential business partners. CEOs who had once dismissed her ideas now competed for her attention. University presidents offered honorary degrees. Government officials slipped business cards into her hand with whispered invitations to exclusive committees. Malcolm spotted Marcus first, making his way through the crowd with Anastasia in tow, his expression a careful mask of cordiality strained by panic. "Incoming at 2 o'clock," Malcolm murmured to his brothers, who subtly repositioned themselves around their mother in a protective formation that appeared casual but was precisely calculated. "Danielle?" Marcus approached, his voice artificially bright. "Congratulations again on your award. I'd like to properly introduce you to my fiancée, Anastasia Worthington. Anastasia, this is Danielle Haynes, a known acquaintance from years ago." Anastasia extended a manicured hand, her assessment of Danielle swift and thorough. Her gaze, however, lingered on the triplets, confusion evident in her expression. "Your sons are absolutely enchanting," she commented, studying their features. "And they have such extraordinary eyes. So familiar." Malcolm stepped forward, his posture mirroring Marcus's unconsciously. Genetistically speaking, the probability of 3 unrelated individuals sharing this specific shade of green is approximately 0.00007%. "I beg your pardon?" Anastasia's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together. "Statistics," Alexander smiled politely. "Our specialty, along with algorithm development, neural cartography, and advanced medical research." Danielle watched the exchange with outward calm that belied her racing heart. This confrontation was unfolding differently than she had imagined during countless sleepless nights over the years. The power dynamic had inverted so completely that Marcus seemed almost pitiable in his desperation. "Malcolm was accepted to MIT at 14, Danielle explained smoothly. "Alexander developed an algorithm that NASA uses for topographical mapping of Mars, and James recently published his research on neuroplasticity in the Harvard Medical Journal." Marcus's face alternated between deathly pale and flushed as he grasped Danielle's elbow with surprising force. "We need to speak privately. Now." "What's happening, Marcus?" Anastasia asked, her social training failing to mask her growing alarm as she observed the tension crackling between them. "Nothing," he replied too quickly. "Just business." "Business?" Malcolm's voice carried the precise, clear tone that had impressed MIT admissions officers. "Interesting definition for paying $250,000 for a pregnant woman to disappear from your life." The silence that followed was absolute, as if someone had abruptly muted the surrounding conversations. Anastasia looked from Marcus to the triplets, comprehension slowly dawning across her aristocratic features. You're their father?" she whispered, horror evident in every syllable. "He's nothing to us," James responded calmly. "Biologically, we share 50% of genetic material. Socially, ethically, emotionally, 0. Marcus attempted to salvage the rapidly deteriorating situation. "This was a long time ago. I was young, frightened. You were 30 years old, executive vice president of Bell Hotels, and told our mother she wasn't worth the inconvenience she would cause to your career," Alexander interrupted, his perfect recall delivering the information with devastating precision. "You also stated that your family owned judges in 3 states, and she would never be able to prove paternity." Anastasia took a step back, her hand flying to her mouth. Around them, people had begun to notice the unfolding drama, with several guests not even pretending not to eavesdrop. "How could you possibly know that?" Marcus hissed, sweat now visible on his forehead. "Recording," Danielle answered simply. "The Brooklyn apartment had security cameras. I never used it against you because I didn't need to. But my sons deserved to know the truth about their biological father." At that moment, an elegant silver-haired woman approached their group. Her posture was impeccable, her bearing unmistakably aristocratic despite her 75 years. Eleanor Bell, matriarch of the family and legendary figure in New York society, surveyed the tense gathering with shrewd eyes. "What is happening here?" she demanded, noting her future daughter-in-law's tearful state. Her gaze traveled across the group until it settled on the triplets. For a moment, she seemed to stop breathing. The emerald eyes, the Bell family eyes, stared back at her from three young faces that held unmistakable echoes of her son's features. "Who are these young men?" she asked Danielle directly, her voice steady despite the visible shock. "Your grandsons, Mrs. Bell," Danielle replied calmly. "Malcolm, Alexander, and James Haynes." Eleanor's hand reached out to grasp a nearby chair for support. Her appraisal of the three teenagers was methodical, almost clinical, as she catalogued each familiar feature: the Bell jawline, the distinctive arch of eyebrows, the emerald eyes that had been the family's hallmark for generations. "Marcus," she said finally, her tone deceptively controlled, "you will explain this, immediately." Before Marcus could respond, the buzzing of phones interrupted the standoff. Guests throughout the ballroom were suddenly looking at their devices, expressions of shock and curiosity spreading like ripples in a pond. A tech journalist standing nearby glanced up from his phone to stare openly at the group. On his screen was a breaking news alert from the New York Post. "Bell Hotel's heir hid 3 children for 15 years. Alexander leaned toward his brothers. The algorithm worked perfectly. Timed release to all major outlets simultaneously. Malcolm nodded slightly. Facial recognition matches already trending on social media. Marcus lunged for Danielle, his composure completely shattered. "What have you done? The agreement—" "I've done nothing," Danielle replied, gently removing his hand from her arm. "My sons, however, are not bound by any confidentiality agreement. They're free to discover and share their own parentage." Anastasia backed away from the group, tears now streaming down her face. "The wedding is in 3 weeks, Marcus. 3 weeks. How could you keep something like this hidden?" "Anastasia, please!" Marcus reached for her, but she recoiled from his touch. "Don't," she whispered. "Just don't." As she retreated through the crowd, Marcus turned back to Danielle, his expression a mixture of rage and panic. "You've orchestrated this. You've waited 15 years for revenge." "Revenge?" Danielle shook her head slightly. "This isn't about revenge, Marcus. It's about truth. You made choices 15 years ago that affected 4 lives profoundly. Did you think those choices would never have consequences?" Eleanor Bell's voice cut through the tension. "Enough. This is not the place." She turned to Danielle, her expression inscrutable. "Ms. Haynes, I would appreciate an opportunity to speak with you and my grandsons, privately. Tomorrow morning, perhaps?" Danielle nodded her agreement, surprised by the matriarch's composure in the face of such a public revelation. As Eleanor led her shell-shocked son away through the whispering crowd, James turned to his mother. "Are you okay?" Danielle looked at her 3 extraordinary sons, brilliant, principled young men who had orchestrated a truth that she had protected for 15 years. In their faces, she saw not only echoes of Marcus, but reflections of her own strength. "I'm better than okay," she replied softly. "I'm proud of you. All of you." As they made their way toward the exit, smartphones captured their departure. Danielle, with her head high, flanked by 3 teenagers whose resemblance to Marcus Bell was now the focus of rapidly spreading news alerts across the country. In their suite at the Four Seasons, Malcolm turned on the television to find their story already breaking on cable news. Alexander monitored social media on his tablet, tracking the explosion of interest. James sat quietly, watching his mother as she stood at the window overlooking the Manhattan skyline. "You're not angry with us?" he asked finally. Danielle turned, her expression thoughtful. "You did what you felt was right, just as I did 15 years ago when I decided to protect you from the truth." She smiled softly. "The difference is that you're in a position of strength that I never had." As the first notifications of headlines began to flash on the phones of those present, "Bell Hotel's heir hid 3 children for 15 years," No one could have predicted that it would be Eleanor Bell, not Danielle Haynes, who would take the next surprising step in this family drama now unfolding before the entire world. The breaking news alerts illuminated phones throughout Manhattan like digital wildfire. By dawn, news vans had assembled outside the Four Seasons, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like mechanical flowers seeking the sun. Inside her presidential suite, Danielle managed the crisis with the same methodical precision that had built Onyx Digital from nothing. "We need to issue a statement," advised Jenna, Onyx's chief communications officer, who had flown in overnight from Detroit. "The markets open in 3 hours. Our stock will be volatile." Danielle nodded, watching her PR team work the phones while monitoring social media on multiple screens. The stock tickers on one monitor showed Bell Hotels already down 7% in pre-market trading, while Onyx had inexplicably risen 3%. "Mom," Malcolm called from the adjacent room where the triplets huddled around their devices. "Marcus's wedding has been indefinitely postponed, according to Worthington family sources." "The Worthington family legal team is reviewing the prenuptial agreement for breach by material omission," Alexander added, scrolling through a legal blog. "Senator Worthington has cancelled all public appearances for the week." James, always attuned to emotional undercurrents, watched his mother carefully. "Are you okay with all this?" Danielle turned away from the Manhattan skyline, her expression contemplative. "This isn't how I would have chosen for the truth to emerge, but perhaps there is no perfect way to uncover 15 years of deception." Her phone chimed with a message from an unexpected source. Eleanor Bell requested a meeting in 1 hour in the hotel's private library, alone with the triplets. "What do you think she wants?" James asked, as they prepared to meet the grandmother they'd never known. "To assess us," Malcolm replied pragmatically. "We represent both threat and opportunity to the Bell legacy." "We represent truth," Alexander corrected, something apparently in short supply in that family. Danielle adjusted Malcolm's tie, a gesture more maternal than necessary given his perfectionism. "Remember who you are, Haynes men. Your worth was never determined by the Bell name or fortune." The Four Seasons Library was a sanctuary of old-world elegance, with leather-bound books and hushed acoustics. Eleanor Bell sat ramrod straight in a wingback chair, her silver hair swept into an immaculate chignon. At 75, she remained formidable, her emerald eyes, the same eyes the triplets had inherited, sharp with intelligence. When they entered, she studied them with unabashed scrutiny before speaking. "Please, sit down." The triplets arranged themselves on the sofa opposite her, identical in appearance but distinct in posture. Malcolm analytical, Alexander strategic, James empathetic. Danielle took a chair to the side, allowing her sons the central position in this encounter. "My son committed an unforgivable mistake," Eleanor began directly, her voice cultured but firm. "Not just with you, Danielle, but with these extraordinary young men and with me. He robbed me of 15 years with my grandsons." Her gaze moved methodically from one boy to the next, cataloging each feature with almost scientific precision. "The Bell eyes, the Bell jawline, even the way you hold yourselves. Nature is remarkably persistent." She removed an envelope from her Hermes handbag. "This isn't money," she explained, noting Danielle's immediate wariness. "These are the deeds to the family summer house in Martha's Vineyard, transferred to the boys' names. It's part of their inheritance by right." Danielle began to protest, but Eleanor raised a hand to silence her. "I know you don't need this. You've built an impressive empire entirely on your own, but this isn't about need. It's about belonging. These young men are Bell as much as they are Haynes, whether we accept that or not." Malcolm leaned forward, his gaze direct. "Why didn't you intervene when your son rejected us?" Eleanor's composure faltered momentarily. "I didn't know. Marcus lied to everyone. His greatest crime was stealing choices from all parties involved. From your mother, from you three, and yes, from me." The conversation continued for an hour, moving from tense confrontation to cautious exploration. The triplets questioned their grandmother with the same incisive intelligence they applied to scientific problems, while Eleanor answered with unexpected candor. By afternoon, Marcus Bell had called an emergency press conference. Looking haggard, with dark circles beneath his eyes and his typically perfect appearance noticeably disheveled, he read from a prepared statement. "I am announcing my temporary leave of absence from the presidency of Bell Hotels to address personal matters," he said, cameras flashing continuously. "I acknowledge that 15 years ago I fathered 3 sons whom I have not been part of raising. This was a failing on my part for which I am profoundly sorry." As he fielded hostile questions from reporters, Danielle watched the broadcast from her suite, her expression unreadable. The boys had insisted on watching as well, studying the man whose DNA they carried but whose character they'd rejected. "He appears genuinely distressed," James noted with clinical detachment. "Elevated cortisol levels, probably minimal sleep in the past 24 hours. Tactical apology," Alexander assessed. His legal team likely advised full disclosure to mitigate damage. Malcolm simply watched in silence, cataloging every mannerism that mirrored his own. 1 week later, the Onyx Digital Board approved Danielle's proposal for a $50 million donation to establish the New Beginning Foundation, dedicated to supporting single mothers in vulnerable situations with housing, education, and entrepreneurship opportunities. The press release made no mention of the circumstances that had inspired the foundation, but the timing spoke volumes. Within hours, Bell Hotels announced a matching contribution of $50 million. The corporate statement included a personal note from Marcus Bell. "Some lessons come at tremendous cost, both to ourselves and to others. This contribution represents a commitment to ensure that other families receive the support mine failed to provide." 6 months after the summit, Danielle sat on the expansive deck of her Lake Michigan home, reviewing quarterly reports while enjoying the early autumn sunshine. Her phone chimed with an unexpected email from an address she didn't recognize. "I wanted you to know that I deeply admire what you've built and how you've raised your sons," wrote Anastasia Worthington, now working for the United Nations in Geneva according to her signature. "Our encounter changed my life in ways I never imagined. I left that toxic relationship and found my own path. Thank you for showing that our true strength comes from within, not from the men we choose." Danielle smiled slightly, saving the message before turning her attention to the lake, where her 3 sons were preparing a sailboat for an afternoon excursion. Their voices carried across the water, their movements synchronized from years of shared existence. Eleanor Bell, who had accepted an invitation to spend the weekend getting to know her grandsons better, settled into the adjacent deck chair. The past 6 months had seen a cautious relationship developing between the matriarch and the triplets, built on mutual respect rather than assumed family obligation. "You won, Danielle," Eleanor said, watching the boys adjust the sails. "Not just survived, but triumphed." Danielle smiled, observing her sons laughing as they worked together. It was never about winning or losing. It was about raising 3 extraordinary human beings and showing them that their worth doesn't depend on a family name or a bank account. "And what about Marcus?" Eleanor asked. "Will you ever forgive him?" Danielle considered the question carefully. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting. We've allowed him to know the boys on their terms. If he proves his worth as a person, perhaps he'll find redemption. Not for me, but for them." On the boat deck, Malcolm waved to them. The setting sun reflected in the emerald green eyes of the triplets, the same eyes Marcus Bell possessed, but now looking at the world with the strength and integrity their mother had taught them. "Do you know what's ironic?" Danielle said, rising to join her sons. "Those $250,000 he paid to make me disappear were the initial investment for Onyx. The money meant to silence me became the foundation of my voice." As she walked toward the boat, Danielle carried not the weight of the past, but the lightness of someone who had built a magnificent future from the ashes of abandonment. Not for vengeance, but for love, for the three extraordinary young men who were her greatest legacy. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen